Today and Across the Fence, we're headed through the turnstiles. We'll visit the greatest place on earth for Boston sports fans. And we'll learn about a class at UVM that uses sports to talk about the issues facing America in the 1920s. Good afternoon and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. Tonight marks Major League Baseball's All-Star Game. The game is part celebration and part exhibition. It's the traditional midway point of the baseball season. Sporting events like the Midsummer Classic serve as a touchstone. You remember where you were when the ball was caught or who was with you when the winning run scored. Sports are also part of the nation's culture. They provide insight into social, political, and economic events. The golden age of sports is taught online through UVM's continuing and distance education program. With Vermont's historic Centennial Field as the backdrop, Across the Fence's Keith Silva talked with the professor who teaches the class.
Sports in the 1920s is called the Golden Age, a time when names like Red Grange, Jack Dempsey, and Lou Gehrig were all the rage.
Well, it's a time of amazing prosperity in the United States, but
Dan Lerner teaches The Golden Age of Sports. It's an online course from UVM's continuing and distance education.
The 1920s is a decade that has nicknames like the Golden Age, the Jazz Age, the Roaring 20s, and it was a time in American history of incredible prosperity for many Americans, not for all Americans. It's also a time of sort of looking inward. World War I had ended. It was a time of cities. The 1920 census is the first moment in American history where we could say more Americans live in cities than don't live in cities, and that was a really big change. It's also a time of mass media. Journalism really exploded in the 1920s, and of course a really new important technology there, which was radio, invented in 1920. It's an amazing time, but it's also a time full of conflict as the country became modern, and not everyone in the country was happy with that.
Lerner uses the history of sports as a lens to examine the social, political, and economic impacts happening in 1920s America.
At a time when the economy was booming, the wealth that was being generated wasn't very equally distributed. And for a lot of people, it was a difficult time. And some of those people have been, occasionally lost to our older history textbooks and have been rediscovered in the last couple decades by historians. Particularly if you're African American, this was a very difficult time. And it was a difficult time for immigrants as well. Not a lot of people know, but in the 1920s, the Ku Klux Klan was at its height. It's the time in history where it had more members than any other moment in American history. And that was a reaction to a lot of things that were happening in the country.
We're at New York's Yankee Stadium with 60,000 fans.
Any discussion about American sports in the 1920s begins with one team and one player in particular, the New York Yankees and Babe Ruth.
What Babe Ruth did for baseball, Henry Ford was doing for automobiles, and Bruce Barton was doing for the world of advertising and journalism. So Ruth kind of fit into a larger context about that. And when we look back, 100 so years after, people look at his accomplishments on the field and they say, that was amazing. Ruth, it's pretty well known, wasn't leading sort of a really healthy lifestyle, and he had those amazing home run accomplishments anyway. So that's pretty incredible. But the idea of an icon, of being larger than life, something that people could sort of have a touchstone to and say, wow, that's a little symbol of America, I think that still rings true with people. Although now in sports we find those kinds of icons in lots of different places, not just in baseball and not just men.
Ruth's first year as a Yankee was 1920, the year after Major League Baseball suffered its biggest scandal. In 1919, the Chicago White Sox were accused of taking money from gamblers to lose the World Series. Fans were left to wonder if the sport was legit.
Baseball was the national pastime at that moment, and to see the pinnacle accomplishment, winning the World Series, or rather losing the World Series for the White Sox, to see that tarnished by gambling was really pretty terrible. Then there was a trial for those 8 individuals in which they were actually acquitted. of the crime of fraud and of throwing the World Series, but the very next day they were banned from baseball anyway, even though they were acquitted. It was a way of Major League Baseball saying, we all have to be above suspicion. Gambling, by the way, was not new to baseball in 1919 or 1920, and it continued after this scandal was over. But that was really a way to sort of rescue the reputation of the game, to restore integrity and say that these players would never be allowed again. And of course, there's a lot of controversy around that, particularly around Joe Jackson, shoeless Joe Jackson, and whether or not he actually took money and whether or not he actually threw the games. If you don't know, he had the best statistics of anyone in the World Series that year, but was banned for life anyway.
Besides baseball's best, Lerner spotlights other athletes of the age who went farther, further, and faster than anyone ever had.
There were superstars in other sports that seemed to be achieving at a level higher than anyone had ever seen before. Red Grange in football, and also Newt Rockne in college football. Gertrude Ederle, which is a person that maybe not everybody knows that name, swam the English Channel 2 hours faster than any man had ever swum before. And there were a lot of critics about women in athletics. They didn't think women were strong enough or tough enough to do that, and she proved them otherwise. In tennis, there were people like Helen Wills Moody who won championships over and over and over and over. And it was that level of accomplishment that I think sort of led us to give it that catchy name, Golden Age of Sports. The other thing I think sports do for us is they can provide a mirror to what's going on in American life, and they can provide a stage. This is actually an essay question I often ask my students in this Golden Age of Sports class. How can sports function as a mirror to show us things about other things happening in American life? Or how can they act as a stage and be the place where certain things that are happening in American life actually get played out? That still happens. It was true in the 20s, and it's true again today.
Despite the age, sports is one way to put history on an even playing field. In Burlington, I'm Keith Silva with Across the Fence.
Well, thanks, Keith. And a tip of the cap to the Vermont Lake Monsters for letting us spend some time at their home field. The Golden Age of Sports is taught online during UVM's winter term. It's offered through UVM's Continuing and Distance Education Division, which is available online at learn.uvm.edu. The website has a complete list of the programs and courses offered. Each year, Continuing and Distance Education at UVM helps thousands of non-traditional students continue their education. Well, summer is the time for lawn care, and for many sports fans in New England, the standard by which they measure their own lawn is the field at Fenway Park. A few years ago, Across the Fence and UVM horticultural specialist Leonard Perry got seats on the field at Fenway to talk to head groundskeeper Dave Mellor about watering, weeding, and feeding America's most beloved ballpark. Here's Leonard with our story.
So David, what's it like to come to work at this great ballpark, one of America's greatest every day?
It's a dream. You know, I get goosebumps every day I walk out here. It's an honor to follow in Joe Mooney's footsteps and to work for such a wonderful organization. You know, ownership and support throughout the club is fantastic.
So it must vary with when the Sox are here versus when they're away, your hours, or you just come in every day and just work late and as needed?
Well, you know, we do whatever it takes. You know, the weather dictates a lot of our job too. So one of the first things I look at in the morning is weather, and one of the last things I look at before I go to sleep is weather. And we plan our days around weather, around extra events, and as far as when the team's in town too. You know, we're very fortunate to I have a great staff, and we also have a weather service we worked with that helps us be able to plan our days well too.
I don't know if you do like some growers I work with, and they check like 6 different forecasts and take the average, see, because they never trust any one over the other.
I don't go to that extreme.
But yeah, you have more reliable source there.
Certainly watch the weather very closely.
Yeah, I imagine, and that'll dictate if you're mowing or not, I assume, and just what practice you're doing. And
absolutely,
and so
there's different disease pressures and different areas we want to work on versus others.
Okay, well, how did you come about having such a dream job as this?
Well, I dreamed of making it to the majors as a baseball player, and was hit by a car and couldn't play anymore. And my family said to not dwell on what I couldn't do, but to focus on what I could. And I walked on crutches for 2.5 years, walked with a cane for 10 months, missed 3 years of college. And my family said I was actually lucky. I had an opportunity to really find what my passion is. And I decided, I loved mowing grass, I love science, and I love baseball and being outside. So I thought, what job is that? And that's a groundskeeper in the major leagues. And for me, my job is the next best thing to playing. I interned for the Milwaukee Brewers, California Angels, and the San Francisco Giants. I went to Ohio State, got a degree in landscape horticulture, and then also agronomy. And for me, it's literally the next best thing to playing.
I know I see a lot of, you mentioned these are some interns out here. You have working during the season. You intern. I assume you'd recommend that for a student with a similar ideas. Internships are important.
Internship gives you a real world opportunity to learn. And what works in the textbook doesn't always work out on the field because of weather or making something safe and playable for the game. Then you come back and use the textbook and that background to fix things. But sometimes you have to fix and make it playable right now. And by having the interns here, they bring a passion with them, and I'm fortunate to have a great staff to go along with the interns.
We mentioned it's just so fun coming to work every day. What are, if you had to pick out one or two things you find most enjoyable, but about looking forward to when you come here?
Gosh, just being at Fenway Park. I emulated, Fred Lynn, Jim Rice, Louis Tiant when I was playing wiffle ball and baseball growing up. The place I walk in and out of the stands the most, my father and brothers used to sit there when they were much younger, and my dad and my brother died. And so for me, it's very special for me to walk by those seats every day, multiple times. And just to soak in the ambiance of Fenway is very special.
Well, that's great. Well, it must be something that, is a problem here or there, issues or challenges. So over the years you found were here, whether it's with the field, things you've had to change. Could you share any of that?
Well, I think in any problem, there's really an opportunity. I think adversity makes us stronger and creates opportunities for us to learn from. I certainly hope to learn from my mistakes, and it's something that, we can all become better at. So any challenge that you're faced with, I think, is really an opportunity in disguise. And, it's an opportunity to thrive and build on your success and learn from mistakes. So, I don't look at something like, oh my gosh, we have a major problem here. I think it's an opportunity. And I'm fortunate to have a great staff and great support from upstairs to fix whatever challenge there is.
I know you've said in the past when you came here the drainage wasn't exactly right, and you had to fix that. So I guess you looked at that like, here's an opportunity to really improve this, make this even a better field.
The last major renovation was done in 1934, and it was a soil-based field that had a big crown to it. And so certainly the technology now, not only do we have better irrigation and drainage and cultivars and everything like that, but we can have a safer field that drains down through. So ownership invested in a new field in 2004, and it's really helped in many different ways.
That's great. Now, you've got such a handle on the professional aspects, and you've actually written a book on the home lawns, too. What would be a couple of key tips you'd recommend for home owners for their own lawns? Problems you've seen, or opportunities, I should say?
Well, I think, one, they want to make sure they're cutting at the proper height. Many people mow too short, and they don't mow often enough. So in New England, you should be mowing between 2.5 and 3.5 inches high. The hotter it is, the higher you want to mow it. So the grass blades shade the soil down below. You want to make sure you're being smart with water. Obviously don't water if there's a water ban, but you want to water at the right time of day. During the day, the wind's going to affect it more. It's going to evaporate more. And if too many people water when they get home from work after a hot day, and the best time to water is between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. so that water is available to the plant come the next day when it gets hot. It's not going to evaporate as much. The winds aren't usually as strong at night. And so they can get timers for their hose. They can hook up their they can hook up their irrigation system through a satellite system so that takes into consideration the weather forecast and really helps program your system so you're not wasting water.
Well, this is just great to learn a bit about this and your background, and just appreciate so much a few minutes of your time and the Red Sox management for this chance to visit with you here today, and appreciate learning a little bit about the park and some home lawn tips too that hopefully some of our viewers can take home, get your books and read those too.
I'm glad you guys came down and we look forward to seeing you again.
Well, a footnote, we visited Fenway in 2013, a couple of months before the Red Sox won the World Series. Coincidence? Well, remember, if you miss an episode of Across the Fence, you can visit our Facebook page. Search Across the Fence on Facebook, like us, and Across the Fence will become part of your daily news feed. We'll let you know what's airing each day and post that day's full program right after the broadcast. You'll also find links to our website where you can access our program archive and find all of the recipes from our monthly In the Kitchen program. That's our program for today. Thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. I'll see you again next time on Across the Fence.